Hello to the attendees that are just joining us. We'll just wait for a few more people to join and then we'll get the event started soon. So hello and welcome to today's online conversation facilitated by Global Government Forum. I'm Sarah Ray, an editor at Global Government Forum, and at today's discussion we're going to be talking about crowding in innovation and how the work of government can be opened up to input from citizens, as well as some of the practicalities and challenges of achieving this. So we want the discussion to be as interactive as possible. So please, to the people who are joining us in real time, do send in your questions for our speakers to answer, and we'll answer as many of them as we can during the event. So please send them in when they come to you. You don't need to wait until the end of the initial discussion. So I'll go ahead and introduce our guest experts for today before we hear about some of their projects and their expertise in this important area. So joining us today, we have Sanjan Sabharwal, who is the head of the Policy Design and Capability Unit in the UK's Department for Education. Camila Medeiros, who is the Director of Innovation at the National School of Public Administration in Brazil. We also have Sigrid Rajalo, who is the Director in the Department of Innovation and Technology within Estonia's Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications. And we're also joined by Maurizio Floyn, who is the head of the Border Innovation Team in the Cabinet Office in the UK. So welcome to our speakers today. And to kick the discussion off, Sanjan, I wanted to start with you. So given your current work at the Department for Education and prior to that at Policy Lab UK, perhaps you could set the scene by sharing a few examples which bring to life the variety of areas where this type of policy co-creation can be deployed.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Lovely to be here and welcome everyone from wherever you are in the world. It's a great question. There are so many ways, and actually I'm quite hopeful about how many ways there are to apply kind of co-production and I guess the crowding in of innovation, which is what we're here to talk about in a policy context. My background is in a design context, and so coming in, I was a bit unclear or unsure in a government landscape whether co-production could work. But over the years, I've been in government for just under 8 years now. And what I've noticed is that over that 8-year period, there's been more and more opportunities to apply these methods and in a really interesting kind of range of places. So, for example, you could use these to kind of address radical tech disruption in a policy context. You could use these methods to negotiate how commons could be kind of used by multiple people who have different opinions about how that commons could be used. And you could equally use it to design public services in a more mission orientated way, which is, I think, where government is going. So, just taking a few examples quite directly, back in 2018, I was running a project in Policy Lab UK where we were asked to work with the Maritime Coast Guard Agency, a regulator, to explore how autonomous ships could be deployed in UK waters. And obviously this was a huge tech disruption, and most regulators are still even now grappling with how new technologies might be kind of accommodated and how as a country we can enable growth. So this is a huge kind of macro challenge for regulators and is not just applicable to this one area. And what we did was we were thinking, how do we firstly crowd in all those international examples of how regulators around the world are dealing with this emerging technology? So we engaged through the International Maritime Organization with countries in North Europe, in America, who are sort of enabling this technology to develop and grow. What are the rules and levers that they've been using? What about the tech disruptors themselves? How do we engage with people who are developing these technologies who the traditional regulator doesn't normally interact with? How do we bring those people into a conversation so that the regulator can build its own awareness of the environment that it's now in? And what we actually were able to do was dramatically increase and share new or find new people for the regulator to interact with, and then they could then reflect on what the regulations mean in the context. And then actually, most importantly, we're also bringing the perspective of people who use these regulations every day. So a harbour master needing to understand whether there is a risk in putting an autonomous ship in the waters that they are responsible for. How do they grapple with these kind of trade-offs around safety versus what their expectations are? So that was one example of where we've applied the kind of co-production method to bring those diverse perspectives together. Another one was around how do you, going back to the commons, how do you build trust where trust has broken down across multiple stakeholders? So, for example, the sea bass, which is the most popular and profitable fishing stock in the UK waters, surprisingly not salmon, although we all like sea bass maybe on a plate if we go to a nice restaurant. It's normally one of the most expensive things on the menu. Sea bass is a very contested stock because recreational fishers like to fish for big bass, and commercial fishers actually like to fish for smaller bass because it fits on the plate. And when you've got these competing tensions between people wanting a big fish and people wanting a small fish, and the wider environmental and sustainable considerations of a depleting stock and all that means for the ecosystem, it brings in a very interesting and complex area of trade-offs and negotiation. So what we did in that situation was we went and talked to people with the lived experience, the people who fished for these things, the people who were fishmongers, who were the coastal communities that relied on the economies of and the marketplaces for these fish. We went and spent days at pubs where we had hordes of local fishermen come and talk to us in pop-up research, but we also conducted wide-scale debate online using a collective intelligence technology called Polis. This was during our time at Policy Lab. And through that process, we were able to sort of triangulate the deep insights we were getting from the people on the ground with the macro insights that were essentially identifying where there was areas of consensus and area of contention with this stock. And then we drew all of that together to run several tabletop activities, workshops, where we brought together scientists, local communities, fishers of different flavors, and got them to help us prioritize policy interventions across to basically set out a fisheries management plan and framework. So we did that, and it really helped to build trust. I mean, this was a community where we heard, although we didn't see, that chairs had been thrown across the table when these communities were coming together. So we had to design an engagement approach which really built trust from the ground up across the stakeholders, but also with the government, between the government and its stakeholders, to get to a conclusion. And then that was kind of prior to a formal consultation going out. So we did a lot of work over about a year to engage with a huge amount of people to build confidence in some recommendations that were put forward. And then briefly, if I may, just talking about the mission-driven context we're in, that requires diversity of perspectives, but also aligning to a global goal. I was actually having a conversation yesterday where perception of missions might be very different across the world. So in Australia, for example, missions might be considered slightly colonial, whereas in this country, missions are seen as like quite a good way of organizing. And this is sort of like, internationally, we might see different views on this. But in the UK context, we're certainly seeing missions helping to drive a clear agenda across the government, helping departments work more collaboratively together, but also working through layers of government from local authorities through to mayoral authorities through to national government and all the service landscape that kind of sits alongside that. So within the department, in the Department for Education, we've been exploring how, as a team, we can support some of the work that Pat McFadden recently announced, which was a £100 million innovation fund to support to kind of radically test and learn innovative interventions for family support, which is sort of two areas of focus from his announcement in December. And so we're kind of building relationships and almost using what we've already got to start that process of building the kind of platform that we can use to start that innovation happening at many levels. So that's kind of bringing the diverse perspective of lived experience of the end user, as well as cross-government stakeholders and the delivery partners that we need to achieve that mission, which is incredibly ambitious. So I'll stop there.
Brilliant, thank you. And just to remind audience members who've arrived since we've begun, we're going to be taking questions throughout, so please do send them in as you think of them. And Sanjan, just to follow up a little bit on what you said, you obviously offered quite a broad range of examples there. So could you just tell us a bit about how you think through the different methodologies that you would use for a certain project or policy that you work in?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly I've noticed during the time that we've been working that the kind of scale of complexity of these projects has increased, and so with that and a growing kind of understanding of how kind of we need to work in a more systematic way and think through a systems lens rather than a departmental silo lens to solve these problems. That therefore the tools you kind of might draw upon might be different. So for example, we used ethnography in our CBAS work to really capture the imagery and the kind of the visuals of the lived experience, because it's so different to what a civil servant and a policymaker might experience every day. And actually, by bringing that the video footage of people in their context working in this way, who might not traditionally formally reply to a consultation, bring those voices right into government decision-making fora. It really built empathy, and it allowed us to just think from a different perspective when making some of our, like when considering what we even do. So that's like one way of thinking. And actually, even when we're doing participatory co-design, we actually are co-designing the co-design process with the participants. So it's not simply this is our kind of cookie cutter co-design approach. It's, for example, we've just done some work in schools. We co-produced or kind of tested and learnt what could work in a like how you could do co-design with year 10s. That might be very different to how you do co-design with people in junior school, because of the language, the concepts that people might even be aware of. We certainly understood that pizza was a great way to keep people engaged as a kind of incentive towards the end of the workshops. But we made sure we are co-designing with the children or the young people, and also working with experts to learn what works from an academic perspective. So it's really about testing and learning your methodology as you go. Within the systems context of missions, what we're finding, as well as the kind of academic literature from the Institute for Innovation in Public Purpose, is thinking about systems innovation framework. So how can you get people thinking about the purpose of a system, how the kind of I'm gonna forget this now. The purpose of the system, the power relationships in that system, the resource flows of that system, and actually the relationships between actors in that system. So using these lenses critically to think through how you shift a system is really important. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Camilla, if we could go to you, could you tell us a little bit about the role of the National School of Public Administration and share some examples of how you facilitate co-creation through that?
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to be here, sharing Brazilian experiences as we also get to know a little more about what other governments around the world are doing. Well, first of all, I would like to give a quick context on what's ENAP and what's Genova. ENAP is Brazil's National School for Public Administration, and we are a center in training, research, and experimentation for public servants. Our mission is to foster capacity building, leadership, and evidence-based policymaking. We work to develop skills that empower government professionals to solve complex challenges and improve public services. Within ENAP is Genova, our innovation unit. We are sort of an innovation laboratory, and we are designed to accelerate change in the public sector. We explore new approaches in a very experimental way, and we have been experimenting around and with human-centered design, open innovation, and AI-driven solutions. And our goal is to help government agencies to co-create, test, and scale solutions, impactful solutions, and policies and public services. So what we do is mainly innovation project and capacity building program. And we also support the development of innovation labs within public organizations across Brazil. So we help create structured environments where experimentation and collaboration can thrive, ensuring that innovation is part of our public sector culture. And as the theme of our panel today is how to open up policy development to people-powered insight, I want to bring a couple of examples of things that we have been doing. The first case I want to present is our Open Innovation Program that was launched in 2019. First of all, I think it's important to say that we consider open innovation mechanisms, programs, or projects as open government. And our strategy is to connect public challenges with innovation solutions. And we have been engaging thousands of people, organizations, and experts in a collaborative problem-solving process. So far, since 2019, we have mobilized over 3,000 people from all Brazilian states, including public servants, startups, researchers, and civil society. We have partnered with over 100 public and private organizations, and we have launched over 25 open innovation challenges in 2024 alone, and we have recognized 20 outstanding solutions to these open innovation challenges. One of the most exciting things that we are doing right now that is currently underway is our Regional Development Open Innovation Program that we have been doing in partnership with the Ministry of Regional Development and Integration. This initiative is tackling key challenges across Brazil, and we are focusing mainly on 4 axes: building local government capacity to improve public management, implementing a national land use planning agenda to guide sustainable territorial development, enhancing connectivity between what we call intermediate cities that are leading cities in a certain region with people, businesses, and governments to boost regional economic growth, and increasing public procurement of locally produced goods and strengthening strategic value chains, especially through the National Integration Routes Program. So this program that is, as I said, ongoing, has already sparked 24 solution proposals, and well, it's demonstrating the power of open innovation and mobilizing talent and expertise to solve public challenges. The second example I want to share is Click. Click is we call it a co-lab. It's a collaborative innovation lab designed to bring citizens directly into the process of improving public services. It's a partnership between Genova and the Ministry of Social Development, the Office of Comptroller General, and the Organization of Ibero-American States, and from the civil society, the Instituto Procomum. This program is proof to our commitment to citizen-driven innovation and social policies. And how does it work? The program was launched last year, and we are currently working on a second go to the program. And the idea is that every year we select a real world public challenge, and we invite citizens to co-create solutions and alongside policymakers, experts, and designers. In 2024, last year, we tackled this problem. How can we improve public understanding of CADE Único and its function? CADE Único is Brazil's unified registry for social programs, but many eligible citizens, they can't reach the benefits that they are entitled to due to a lack of information. So last year we had over 150 citizens that applied to participate in the challenge. 30 participants were selected, and they came up with 5 innovative prototypes that were developed and tested in real world conditions by them. And Click, we think that Click represents a paradigm shift in public sector innovation in Brazil, because instead of designing policies for citizens, we are designing with citizens. So we engage people that directly experience public services and generate solutions that are more human-centered, more effective, and more sustainable. And we also have a very interesting example from the Secretaria de Governo Digital, the Digital Government Secretary at the Ministry of Management and Innovation in the Public Services, that has a dedicated UX and UI team that is focused on making government services simpler, more accessible, and user-friendly. I would like to share this very specific challenge that was redesigning the proof of life process. Previously, millions of retirees and pensioners in Brazil, they had to visit a physical bank branch every year to prove that they were still alive in order to continue receiving benefits. I don't have to say that this process was difficult especially for mobility restricted individuals. It was exclusionary for those that are living in remote areas, and it was time consuming for both citizens and public agencies. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the system became completely unworkable. I mean, people couldn't leave their works, and elderly citizens, who are the majority of the beneficiaries, were amongst the most vulnerable profiles to COVID, and the government had to find very fast a safe digital alternative. So this unit led a complete rethinking of the process and made it digital first and inclusive. So today the verification is still needed, of course, but users can use it remotely through facial recognition, through a simple and intuitive mobile app. It wasn't an easy journey. You can imagine that under very strong pressure, we had to go through lots of moving forward and then backward and experimenting, implementing things that we were learning from real-time usage of this app. But today we have we understand that this was a very impactful project. Millions of retirees no longer need to visit a bank or a government office to prove that they are alive. The process now is faster, and it has improved accessibility and user experience, especially for the most vulnerable populations. And while we had a safer solution during the pandemic, and we can say that we protected millions of elderly from unnecessary exposure to COVID-19. So these are the three examples. These are three examples of things that we have been doing in Brazil to foster opening up policy development to people-powered insight.
Brilliant, thank you. And in terms of the open innovation and the click, for example, could you maybe give us one example of an interesting solution that has been proposed through that might not have come about using traditional methods?
Okay, well, in Click, we had this very, very, very interesting solution that came about. That's a game that is to be used in schools in general for kids between 11 and 14 years old. So the idea of the group was that kids can act as they can serve as ambassadors, or they can serve as a way to make information to get to mothers, fathers, caretakers in general, so they can understand better how can they access benefits that they are entitled to. So the game was it's a week journey on a school. It's what we call in Portuguese a gincana, as it has a certain number of activities, and it has a board game that people move through the activities, and the kids, as they move through the activities, they are developing and a broader knowledge of the benefits that people are entitled to. And they made a very and it works because they checked on what the kids knew before and what the families knew before about the Cadastro Único, and then afterwards we could see and improve on the understanding of the Cadastro Único. So this is something that came along that's pretty easily adaptable to different realities, different schools. So this was a pretty interesting. It was a pretty interesting solution that came from CLIC. From the Open Innovation Program, we had very interesting series of callings for AI solutions for government, and some of them are already under development in the first public organizations that we supported, and they are already giving results. I would share the National Agency for Public Health. They had a problem with timing the processes, and they had to make it more transparent. And through an AI solution that is under development but is already being tested, they already have been having very interesting results, and they have now no delay on process development
Yeah.
and at the agency. So these are two examples.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And so Sigrid, to come over to you, in Estonia, I think you have an interesting example of crowd and innovation to share with us around the e-residency program. So could you tell us a little bit about that and how it demonstrates the value of this approach?
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for asking me to be here. It's a pleasure to be here, and hello to everyone online. Before I dive into the example, just a few words about my background and the work we're doing. For working in the Ministry of Economy and being in charge of designing the innovation and RDI policy in Estonia. Well, for me and for my team, the main stakeholders and the main clients are companies. So everything we do for the benefit of companies to provide them a good environment to innovate and support their ambitions. Now, the e-residency program, well, again, everything that we do in Estonia, as we are a small and a compact country, we have to punch above our weight. So the e-residency program started with an open call competition run by a development fund that was existent back then. The idea was to, in a very broad scale, everybody in Estonia who has ideas how to punch above our weight, so to speak, were able to put forward their ideas. And one of these ideas was put forward by a couple of people who thought that perhaps providing digital identity cards and digital identity as such to people outside Estonia would make Estonia bigger and would provide the digital services to anyone else outside Estonia. Because by now, all of our main services that the state provides to citizens and also to companies are digitalized. So that idea was put forward, and that was back in 2014. And yes, the idea was simple, to issue a digital identity and the status to people outside of Estonia to provide Estonia's e-governance services. And as often happens, when you put forward an idea, you have to be the one who carries it out. So one of the team leaders or the persons behind the ideas was then employed by my ministry as a vice chancellor to actually get it done. So a lot of things had to happen behind the scenes. For instance, discussions with our police and border guard to be able to identify the applications put forward by people outside Estonia, to accept or reject their applications. But it took off finally, and by now we have let's say brought forward the digital services to tens of thousands of companies, because the idea in the end was to get more companies being launched in Estonia in using these digital services, and more than 100,000 e-residents are now out there in the world, from our neighboring countries to Asia to United States. So that's I think one of the successful stories that we can be proud of, and actually it was put forward from a very let's say rude situation. But listening to Camilla and Sanjan, actually I realized we have perhaps a few examples more, stories more to share with you. For instance, if you don't mind to quickly run through them. For instance, one of our local authorities a few years ago initiated this, like they call it, inclusive budget design. So every year when the local authorities were putting together their yearly budgets, they put aside a certain proportion for the citizens then to put forward their ideas, and let the citizens then vote upon which project should be included into the local authority budget. And as far as I know, I wasn't the one who was voting for these ideas, but the local citizens were quite happy with this initiative. And one more example from my field. Well, I said before that for me, for my team, the entrepreneurs and the companies are the main clients, and everything we do for their benefit. We are well aware that our policy design, well, we don't know everything happens in the field, although Estonia is very small. So we initiated this, that we partly financed R&D advisors inside our industry associations. It's no strings attached. It's very flexible. Their only aim is to provide insight from their very specific industry needs, so that we as policy designers in the ministry and also in our financing authorities might then take up these ideas and perhaps design new policy interventions. And this is a process that's ongoing right now, and we're working closely in collaboration with these R&D advisors. So these are just a few examples from Estonia.
Brilliant, thank you. And Murish, could you give us some examples from the Border Innovation team?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for joining us, and the other panelists for really interesting examples so far. I might just say a little bit about sort of who we are, why we exist, and then jump into some of the examples. So the Borders Group and Cabinet Office was set up primarily to deal with the UK leaving the European Union and instituting an external border with a very close, geographically and economically, very close trading partner. It's obviously something that we hadn't had for quite a long time. It took a lot of coordination between different border agencies and departments, I think, It depends how you count them, but there's something like 28 government bodies who have an interest in how the UK border works. So it takes quite a bit of coordination. My bit of that was intended to look at sort of future-facing bits of that work. So how can we make use of data and technology to streamline that process to make sure that it runs as smoothly as possible? I think so the first phase of that, we ran through something called the Ecosystem of Trust, which was a series of pilots that looked at various different types of technologies. You name the buzzword, it was there. We were looking at sort of blockchain technologies, looking at commercial data and how we could access that early in the supply chain, looking at things like Internet of Things devices, whether sort of GPS and smart devices within shipping containers could tell us more about where those goods were, what condition they're in, sort of what route they have taken on the way to the UK. It was all very interesting. There was a lot of really useful information there. But I think the thing that came to me after I joined the team, which was sort of towards the end of that initial project, was sort of, so what do we do with it now? It's all sort of very good to have all of this information, lots of data, but actually someone actually has to do something with that information, figure out how to make it useful. And I think that's really where the sort of co-design piece comes into it. So following on from those initial pilots, we set up some projects called Border Trade Demonstrators, which we are still running at the moment. Those are very much intended to be slightly smaller scale, more targeted, and really looking to involve users from the outset. So we spent a lot of time speaking to industry, speaking to people who are on the front line at the border, figuring out what are the problems that they really face day to day, and how can we start with those problems and use some of the information that we have, that we learned about through those pilots, to figure out how we can address them. I think like one of the real sort of key things I've taken away from that is really spend a lot of time figuring out what the problems are before you get into solutions. So like as a policy person sitting in a central government department, really unlikely that I'm going to know exactly what the problems are that those sort of users face. It's probably pretty unlikely that those users will be able to give you that answer the first time they speak to you, because they're pretty busy. They have to take some time to step back from it. So it's really important to understand like what's their lived experience like. And I think Sanjin spoke about ethnography, which is like a formal way of doing that kind of work. I think like doing some user research, really spending some time with the people who are involved is really important. The other part of sort of delivering those projects is balancing that. And this is a very common thing for policy people, balancing that tension between competing interests, right? We had trade on one hand who really wanted things to move more smoothly, to sort of see what the quickest and easiest way to get their goods through the border was. We have public bodies on the other hand who are tasked with doing things like checking goods, making sure they have duty paid on them, making sure there's nothing illegal in them. Both are right, and both have legitimate aims, but it's difficult to find the balance between them. And I think one of the key things that I found as part of that is trying to build that trust between the two parties, and being in the Cabinet Office, having a little bit of a sort of removed position from that, not coming in with any agenda, and being able to be a bit of a mediator between those two sets of competing interests, I think was really useful in what we were able to do. I think having that slight degree of removal is very helpful, so that you can kind of build that trust between those participants and get them to a place where they can come to agreement on solutions.
Excellent, thank you. So to follow up on that, and now we're getting some questions in from the audience already. So Murish, I'll start with you, and I'll ask this question to everyone because I think it's relevant to what everyone's been discussing. Carol is asking, how would you sum up the benefit of working with the public in terms of time and cost?
So I think it's not something I'd written down, but I hadn't said anything. I think there's a real benefit, and it's really important for us because we're all of us, I think, managing public money, right? Like it's not our money that we're spending. So it's really important that when you spend money, you spend it on things that have impact and you're not wasting it. I think you can save a lot of money by doing user research and by really understanding whether what you're delivering is going to have an impact. So I think there is a real benefit from a cost perspective. It does take an upfront sort of investment of time to spend a lot of to do that sort of user research or to go through the ethnography process that Sanjin talked about. I'm sure there are lots of other methodologies that he'll be expert on and can talk us through. But I think there is a real benefit. I think the sort of the other thing I would say, and this happened as part of our project, like build stuff quickly and break it. And if you can do things that you are not very attached to because you haven't spent a lot of time and money on them at the outset, that's really good, because you can end up with incentives to try and make what you've built work because you've invested lots of time and money into it, even if it's not the right solution. So I think I would definitely say the upfront investment of time in people and understanding their needs is important. And I would say a smaller investment of time at the outset and trying to come up with solutions and testing them quickly, figuring out if they're useful or not, and getting rid of them if they're not and starting again, or figuring out if there's a bit of it that's useful that you can iterate on top of is the approach I would take.
Excellent. Sanjan, what do you add to that?
Oh, good. Well, I think those are great answers. I think one of the interesting things from hearing the panel as well is that the crowding in can be different. You could be crowding in different types of people in order to achieve an innovation. So taking a sort of technology perspective, sort of the mission-driven government now is sort of it's rethinking what risk is. And I think this is particularly relevant for the industrial strategy space, which is where the kind of Mariana Mazzucato School of Thought is, which is it's not about de-risking, it's about taking risks. And actually that's a very different framework to, I think, what government has been used to. So one is kind of being okay with the fact that we might need to take a risk and kind of do something new. That's very good if you're doing kind of a radical innovation where maybe you're not kind of doing the faster horse, you're doing the car invention. On the other hand, you might be crowding in the sort of people who are doing existing service delivery when you're thinking about incremental improvements to services or rolling out those services more broadly across a wider range of local authorities, for example. So I think the kind of group of people you're crowding in might be different, and sort of the method you would use, like the test and learn method, might be very different as well. You might be testing and learning with paper prototypes or cardboard things in a school gymnasium or something, if you're trying to mock up like how a teaching environment might be very different, or you're commissioning something like the accelerated capability environment, which is a home office sort of function, or sort of side part of the home office, where essentially they've got a huge network of tech innovation companies who take a real world challenge and build a kind of workable minimum viable product and then compete for funding to expand that and make it a big kind of rollout of technology that might impact the border force, or it might impact, how you're tracking freight and security, all the kind of stuff around that. So those are my initial reflections.
Sigrid, what would you say about thinking through the benefits of the time and cost, or perhaps justifying or measuring this even?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with what's been heard already here, that it has to be about taking risks, because you can't do any kind of innovation without taking the risk. So there wouldn't be any innovation otherwise. And it actually doesn't even matter if it's radical innovation or incremental innovation. But the main thing about crowding in innovation is getting the expectations right, or agreeing upon why we are here. What are the expectations? So you don't let people down unexpectedly. And of course, in this process, it's always important to follow up. So to let people know what happened with their insights, and how are these going to be used, because oftentimes I see that the process takes up so much energy and it seems like a big investment, but policy designers might be exhausted then to let people know what happens next. But to answer your question, there are definitely, if these things taken into account, it's definitely worth. So there are more plus sides or more benefits in taking on this process.
And Camilla.
Oh, I agree with everything that has been said, and I want to share something. I think that of course that it has cost and time benefits, but above all, I think that bringing people into the process of designing public policies or services, it brings credibility benefits. Errors come with a high reputational and trust costs. As I was telling before, the path to redesigning the proof of life process was not without challenges. We made mistakes at a critical moment, that was during the pandemic, but the speed of correction, as we were very attentive to what people were saying about the process, about the app, about the solution, was absolutely essential to mitigating reputational costs and restoring trust at that moment. So bringing people to the process has other benefits other than just cost and time.
Thank you. So Dan, who's from a UK council, is asking, is it easier to crowd in innovation around more tightly defined questions? So he gives the example that asking partners to contribute to making housing estates healthy places is very broad, whereas asking how can we map the underused public space on estates is more targeted. So Sanjan, what do you think? Is it easier when you've got a more tightly defined question, or does it depend on what factors?
Yeah, I think Dan, you've almost. I'm actually coming to Camden Council tomorrow, so we should have a catch up tomorrow morning. But just thinking about this question, I think the way that mission sort of set out, at least in the literature I've seen, is you kind of have that broad challenge, which might be the first one, the broader healthy places and healthy housing estates challenge, and then you might have the kind of more project specific one. I think what you need firstly is more knowledge, which you can probably do from the crowding in part, where you kind of go, okay, we know we're interested in these housing estates and what they even look like, what are the components of a housing estate, who's there, understand, go and spend time there, hear from the people who live there, understand the history, the context of the place, and then almost that will uncover probably how specific the next part needs to be. You could even be kind of co-producing or co-creating sub-challenges to that question. You could be prioritizing that with the community. You could be understanding what levers you have available at a local authority level versus a national level, and who in the community could be kind of responsible, take agency in that space too. So I think it's almost about refining your question with the community you are working with. That's how I would take the approach, and then both can work.
Great. Any of the other panelists want to add on that around defining the question that you put out? Camilla, please.
Well, if I can jump in, I'm sorry.
No, please do.
I think that it depends on the objective. I think that if the goal is to identify concrete solutions, then well-defined problems lead to more targeted and actionable outcomes. But if the goal is to go more experimental, then broader challenges allow for greater exploration, creativity, and unexpected insights. So I guess it depends on what's the objective.
Mirish or Sigrid, anything you'd like to add? Yeah, Mirish, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna make a similar point to Camilla, that it depends on the objective. The other thing I was gonna say is that I think very specific problems are useful, particularly in that kind of incremental build. The risk with them is that you assume what the problem is without doing enough work. So Dan, you may have done lots of research on this, and I certainly don't. You know a lot more about making housing estates healthy places than I do. But from our experience, one of the things that we tried to avoid was going in with a very clear understanding of what the problem was before we'd done a lot of work with users. Just to give an example of that, we had kind of gone in with the assumption that traders would say, yeah, cost is the really important thing with moving goods across the border after Brexit. That's what really matters, making sure that the cost is minimized. It is important to them, like there's no doubting that, but actually predictability is way more important. If they know when something is going to arrive, they can manage the cost and they can charge the right costs when they're selling the end product. What they can't manage is sometimes something takes a certain amount of days, sometimes something takes longer than that. That changes the solution that you try and deliver at the end of it, right? But without knowing that and going straight into a very specific task about cost, you might miss what would really affect or make a difference to the people involved in the project. So I think agree with everything that's been said before. If it suits for your project to go down the specific problem statement route, then sort of just reiterating what I said before, which is like doing a lot of speaking to end users to figure out really what that problem is really important before you go down a certain.
Excellent. Thanks. And Sigrid, what would you like to add on defining the question or the problem statement?
Yeah, I was just wanted to add that, or actually bring in example, because I also agree that missions are rather broad. They can't be specifically defined. But for instance, my team is working on bringing forth innovation procurement, so to provide access to innovative technology-intensive companies into the procurement market. But even in that case, when a procurer or tenderer defines a specific challenge or problem it has, they still have to be open to different kind of solutions. They have to be technology agnostic, for instance, because otherwise they will not get innovation. So in either case, if it's even a bit more tightly defined problem, you have to be open to different kind of solutions.
Oh, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions in about the ripple effects of work. So a lot of these projects describe inviting participation from citizens. Harriet is asking if governments have capacity to work with uninvited forms of participation, such as from community groups, charities, or activists who have become active in certain issues or concerns. Is there capacity or mechanisms to work with these groups in shaping policy? And someone else is asking that in the missions, for example, the purpose is also to inspire, catalyse wider innovation, and about how you can track the ripple effects of that, even if perhaps it's not a direct contribution. So would anyone like to take those two? Murish, how about you?
Sorry, finding the mute button. You can certainly have a go at the second one. I think doing this type of work and creating like an environment where you have participants from different parts of the system, so if that's public bodies, industry, charities, in certain cases, for my particular role that's less relevant, but it certainly would make sense in other areas. I think creating an environment where you are free to sort of think about the broader picture and how you might redesign it, and taking that approach that we spoke about earlier about sort of not setting expectations but also not being worried about taking risks, means that you can get a sort of knock-on effect into work that's not directly what you're doing as part of that particular project. So for instance, as part of the pilots, we're running quite a few of the participants in that have changed their processes and stood up slightly like innovative solutions to figure out problems that they were facing amongst themselves, which aren't directly related to what we were doing, but the fact that they are speaking as part of this sort of ecosystem that's been created as part of the pilot has given them the opportunity and the space and the contact to talk about that kind of stuff. And I think, again, building that sort of trust between them so that they know that they're coming at it from the perspective of trying to find mutual solutions rather than, for instance, a commercial provider approaching a public body and trying to sell them a solution, I think makes a difference to the engagement that those types of people can, or those types of groups can have.
Sanjan, as you're working on a mission, and that was included in the question, have you thought about how you might track the sort of wider ripple effects of trying to get people behind this idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very early days in terms of
Yes.
where we're at on the missions. But I think what's interesting is we've been engaging with sort of evaluation teams within government, and they're quite sort of involved in this thinking right now. We had a really interesting conversation yesterday with someone who was in Policy Lab before and is now working as an academic doing a PhD. And they were talking about participatory evaluation as a sort of another form of and another angle of assessing kind of the impact of work, which is something I've not really explored much, but I think it's quite an interesting way of thinking, which is, often when we're evaluating things, we're using metrics which are somewhat political, somewhat kind of setting out the expectations we have. It's about, is it efficient? Is it effective? Is it value for money? All of these things, they kind of create a framework for what is sort of recognized as good. And so actually, but if you did that kind of evaluation in a more participatory way, and you got end users to think about what was good from their perspective, might you get a different result? I think it goes back to what Maurice was talking about in terms of reliability rather than cost effectiveness is sort of one of those evaluative questions that might have shifted through that engagement. So that's one thought. And then another one is that through the projects I've done in the past, one of the things I've noticed in government is that there is a large amount of churn. I think about only less than 10% of policies that are kind of major public policies are properly evaluated in general. So this is sort of an interesting kind of tension we have, which is we're an innovative team doing innovative methods. How do we prove that our work is better than something that wasn't done in an innovative way? And it's actually quite hard because of the kind of lack of evaluation on in general. So I think there's sort of a kind of gap there that's interesting to think about. But what we have to do instead is then kind of almost create our own stories to sort of fill the gap. And it's about scraping data from any which way you can to tell that story. And we're finding that all the time is quite hard to do. But it's the kind of only way I've certainly found to do it so far. But Camilla might have other thoughts. I've also got thoughts around uninvited guests, but maybe I'll come back to that.
Okay, Camilla, let's go to you then.
I want to share a different point of view, since I come from a school for public administration, and we're talking about ripple effect on working with citizens and building things with citizens. I want to share that throughout the years and all the projects that we have been working on, we can verify that the impact on public servants is profound. I mean, stepping out of the offices and co-creating with citizens, opening up the bureaucracy for citizen input, not only delivers better solutions, but also I think that it also means to build state capacity, and it transforms institutional culture. It encourages public servants to adopt these practices in tackling other challenges that they face. So I think that this is also.
Oh, you've got to mute there.
Oops, sorry.
Back.
So this is an effect that we can verify when we make sure that we make sure that public servants can experiment being in contact with the citizens.
And Sigrid, is there anything you would like to add about tracking the sort of wider ripple effects of innovation that these approaches can spur, or how people can come in outside of a sort of formal invitation?
I don't know if our examples are the best to replicate to the other ecosystems, because in our case, well, if we invite our clients or citizens, whoever, to put forward their ideas or share insights, you would have to be living in very. I mean, the information gets there in the majority of cases. So I don't have many examples to share about where the end clients or shareholders haven't been included. But there was this question about how to deal with uninvited participation. So I think it comes down to how you, as the one who manages the process, manages it. So you have to ask the critical questions. You have to like put the monkey on the shoulder of the person who provides you with some other kind of input that's not expected, perhaps in this process. You have to be like constructively critical towards the input you get from anyone. But in any case, also in these kinds of cases, you still have to be open, because I mean you were the one who initiated this process, and there might be cases where this inclusion could be beneficial to other kinds of initiatives, or perhaps someone in other ministry or in some other kind of authority. So we've had these kind of examples before. So these people have to be listened to and then directed to the right paths.
Brilliant, thank you. So we have a question from Cathal, who is asking, how realistic is it to draw generalizable lessons for the broader policy system from very specific initiatives? So I'd be interested to understand how you think about this, and maybe how you pull out those learnings that might be able to be incorporated more widely. Sanjan, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think what we often, it'd be interesting to hear folks on this call's perspective as well, because I know that we often look to Estonia, for example, as like pioneering the digital government kind of model. And so there's something about international examples which can be somewhat really valuable for inspiring, but also really challenging when you think about the completely different political and social contexts and like demographics and diversity of population in all of these different countries. Like, for example, we talk about Singapore as like a really interesting pioneering country, but the population of Singapore is the size of like half of London, and the state is incredibly different to how we operate here, even though we do have obviously some kind of historic links with the place. So it's interesting kind of to, I think, take lightly some of the comparisons, because they're all very different and you have to be kind of context specific. It's very philosophical though, because, you know, it really depends on how you see local government versus central government, even, you know, how much a pattern can be universalized. And I think that's kind of a political choice a lot of the time. And there are many other constraints that you have to work within. So I'm kind of, I'm not going to give you a clear answer on that one, but I think it's very complex, and it kind of depends a lot on the challenge or the kind of area you're looking at. But interested to hear others' perspective on that.
Sigrid, any thoughts from Estonia on how relevant it is to pull out those broader insights and how to share them as well from specific projects?
Well, let's say that when our government wants to reach our citizens as yes, we are very digitalized, so it's very, very context specific. So our citizens are aware that they have to have like digital footprint. So I don't know if I can like answer your question very well.
No worries.
That's the context.
So Camilla, one for you might be how these collaborative type programs, what new sort of skills they require. Could you share any insights from that?
I'm sorry, Sarah. There was a little bit of a glitch here.
No problem. Interested to hear from you about the new types of skills that these participatory programs will require to run within organizations.
Well, I think that one of the skills that is most important, and I think that we can verify great development when we evaluate the public servants. We have an instrument, we have a scale, a behavioral scale that we apply on public servants that participate on our projects. And we have been applying the scale before the project, during the project, and after the project. So we can verify what behaviors the public servants they develop while they go through the project with us. And one of the behaviors or one of the capacities that the public servants develop, I would like to say that is empathy. When going out and working alongside citizens, or Sigrid was saying that she has very important work with businesses, but working alongside people that we have been designing public services to help the public servant to develop a higher grade of empathy. So they start to consider more the importance of at least listening to the beneficiaries of that service or that benefit while designing the service. So I think I will highlight empathy as one of the things that are most developed when we apply or when we invite citizens to work alongside public servants.
Excellent. And someone, Cindy in the comments is asking if you can share that scale that you mentioned there with the, so if you can either do it in the chat or you can share it with us and we can help to do that.
Sure. Unfortunately, it's not in English, but I guess there are many tools that can do the work for us, right? But sure.
Thank you. Mirish, any thoughts on the new or evolving skills that are needed for this type of approach, or other organizational design factors that you need to think about?
Yeah, I like that. There's the obvious answer about sort of data technology, being comfortable with using those types of tools. I think that's important. In some ways, that's like knowledge rather than skills, and people can be trained to do that through a sort of formal learning process. I think I completely agree with what Camilla was saying. I would add sort of like humility to the list of things, like going out and listening and making clear that like you are there to listen to people who probably know a lot more than you do about the thing that you are trying to solve, and being okay with that, and being okay with not being the person who knows the most about this, I think is really important, so that you sort of listen actively to what they're doing. But I think you have very different conversations as well when you set the expectation that you are there to listen to someone to find out their expertise, and it's done on the basis that like expectations are sort of at the right level, that they are telling you something. You're not promising that you can do everything that they're asking of you. I think the other thing, I guess, is like curiosity and like a willingness to, like, sort of going back to the question we were talking about before this, look at international examples, look at other projects from outside of your policy sphere, and try and figure out like, well, there's a solution that worked there. My problem looks a little bit like that. Could we try and use that solution in my policy area? I think is really important, and is like, it, in some ways it's sort of just like a behavior that you sort of pick up over time as you try and do this work. But I think it really is really important.
Brilliant. Sigrid, go to you.
Yes, I wanted to add that for me, what resonates is the concept of trust, because all these skills that are necessary for public officials to carry out these crowding in initiatives, in a good way, they end up with building a trust, a relationship on trust, because it takes a lot of time to build this trust, and it takes so little to break it. So in our digitalized services, it's also built on trust, nothing else, just trust. So and trust in any kind of sense, because it's very important. For instance, I'm sure every country does these questionnaires about in citizens about the trustworthiness of different kind of public authorities, government, parliament, police, border guard, and so on. And if there's no trust towards these authorities, then I think crowding in any kind of input, innovation, among other things, is just not possible.
Thanks. And Sanjan, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I completely agree around the trust point that Sigrid mentioned there. It's the currency, and that goes as well as it being trust between the sort of officials and the people they're engaging with. I think it's actually between officials and officials, like within a department or across multiple departments. That there's a need to find the common goal and the common thread, which means that they might set aside some of their agenda in order to achieve the bigger goal that's sort of impacting the users, because a lot of it I think comes down to even personalities, realistically, and that kind of comes to the question of what are the wider system factors you need. And I think it's about who is doing the crowding in as well as the act of crowding in. So I was on a call as part of my role. I look after the policy profession team in the Department for Education, and we were on a call the other week with some of the kind of newest, most sort of bright civil servants, the fast streamers who've kind of come in to the department. And it was, I think, about 95% of the people on the call had done a humanities degree, probably from a good established university in the UK. And only maybe one or two had got maybe a degree in something that was more like engineering or science. So again, if you've got a kind of monoculture of thinking, which is very good for some things that policy advisors need to do, like drafting and thinking through problems, but often kind of using words to draft your way around a challenge, which I think is something I've heard more recently, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking about it, rather than images to show reality, whether that's through graphs or photographs or things. So I think there's something about the written word which can obfuscate and kind of avoid maybe the challenges you're looking for. And sometimes the other methods that maybe aren't from the humanities are more about facing up to the kind of science of the reality of the world. So I think there's something about crowding in diversity as well from the kind of institution in terms of who is making these decisions and who is taking the role of a policymaker. And actually that also comes to, there's a really interesting blog that I just published today, and I was thinking about this, so it's just nice to have such a validation so quickly, by Nesta, someone called Davina Majithia, and she had written a blog called Innovation Needs Diversity, and it was in relation to EDI, kind of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we've obviously seen internationally that EDI is facing huge pressures, particularly in the United States, to like reduce that diversity of perspective in a context of government. So it's interesting, her case was around innovation requires EDI, and actually maybe it's about thinking differently about where EDI fits in the kind of agenda of government. So I think I'll share the link in the chat, but it's just, I think, a worthwhile read. And I think that diversity of policy maker, whether that's from a kind of different background or from a different school of thought, is really important.
Excellent, thank you. We're running out of time now, so I want to thank the panelists for the participation. And to sum up, I would just ask you, each of you could, to share one brief piece of advice that you might share with someone who is looking to perhaps introduce a more participatory policymaking approach. So it could be to reiterate a point that you've already made that you think is particularly key, or anything else you want to add. Murish, I'll start with you.
Thanks. Think about one thing I would really like people to take away is to spend a lot of time with your users to just figure out what the problem is that they're facing, to really nail that and spend more time, I think, doing that than building your first solution for it. Because if you get the problem right, you'll get to the solution eventually. If you start with a solution, you might never get to the real problem. So I think that's probably the one thing I would like people to take.
Thank you. Camilla, one piece of advice from you, please.
Everything that we do at Genova, it has design as a basis. So my piece of advice is using design mindset to go through the process it helps us to have the right approach to the problem, understanding, and to building or identifying better solutions to this process, to this problem.
Sigrid, thank you.
So I would like you to think like startups. So if every policy designer thinks like startups, which means to be agile, to be flexible, to design, test, fail, and fail fast. So that includes also testing on your users and collaborating with your users and being in constant dialogue. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Sanjan.
Gosh, the one thing I've noticed over the years is that it depends where you are in your kind of policy or public sector space as to how you might want to act. So sometimes you can be in a digital delivery space and you want to change how policy operates, and therefore you need to think, how do I actually build an alliance here rather than build a kind of conflict? Because actually you need to build allies not in the kind of immediate sphere of your like-minded folks, but actually kind of bring expand that tent to be wider. So I think my main thing would be that policy people there's many of them, and they all probably are trying to do their best. So how do you build that ally and allegiance with them to shift the system over time rather than be too abrasive? That would be my one reflection.
Thank you. So I want to thank our panelists today for your excellent insights and examples that you've shared, and also to the audience for the great questions that you've sent in. We will send out a recording to you after the event. And just before we close, to mention that we have a training seminar running on this topic, incorporating diversity in the policymaking process, enacting mission-driven government. It takes place on the 14th of March. The information is available on our website, and we'll also include it in the follow-up email that we send after today. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again on a future event.